All right, with that announcement, we are recording and we are live now. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on finding your stewardship love language. We are TENS, we are the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, and we serve Episcopal churches and communities throughout North America. And we were just recently in Detroit, where we were joined by some of our colleagues from the Diocese of Huron. It was an international affair and it was lovely. So TENS really is wide-reaching, and we're glad to have folks here today from all over, from Seattle to Miami, from San Diego to New Hampshire. We have folks registered for today's call and everything in between. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Amy, and she's going to get us started on the language of love languages of stewardship.
Thank you, Davy. Good morning again, everyone. So today's webinar is based on the 5 love languages, which you may have heard of. It's become quite the cultural phenomenon, and it's based on the information that Gary Chapman wrote in his best-selling book just about 15 years ago or so. And it's based on the idea that we all speak different languages of love, and that as we move through the world, we want to make sure that what we are offering to others feels and sounds like love to them, and then what we are receiving in return feels like love to us. And so he created 5 different languages that help us navigate our relationships. And as we know, being Christians, following Jesus, we're all about love. And so we really think it's an interesting concept, and it's been quite effective to combine this idea of speaking love languages with our words of generosity in stewardship. You know, generosity is not just a practice, it's our way of faith, and as is love. And so we want to try to help you find ways in your programming throughout the year, and then particularly during your campaign, that lets you speak all 5 love languages so that everyone in your community is feeling really recognized and thanked, but also that love that we are hoping to impart in our communities. So if you want to learn more about the 5 love languages, we have the website address here on this slide, and library books and all the other places they're available. They have love languages. It's now become a phenomenon, you know, the love languages of teenagers, the love languages in the workplace, all sorts of things. So we're kind of doing the love languages in the congregation. So what is a love language and why does it matter? I just sort of, touched on that. The big thing is it's so important when we speak love that it is received as love. And one of the things that really helped me, I can say, in my parenting was particularly when my kids got to be in middle school and high school, I really wanted to make sure in the midst of the busyness and in some of that disconnect that happens with teens, that they were still feeling really loved by me. The conversations may not be the same, the cuddles and the snuggles may not be the same, but love was still there. And so learning what each of their love languages really helped me make sure that they were continuing to feel connected and supported. So, for example, one of the love languages is gifts. And I know one of my kiddos really loves gifts, and it didn't have to be anything big, but when I was at the grocery store, I would pick up a pack of her favorite gum and give it to her. And it was a simple way of showing love. And so it doesn't necessarily matter. We tend to speak the language that is our language to everyone else, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily receive it in the same way. So it's helpful to know all 5 love languages because, for example, gifts are not my language, and so I wouldn't think to probably do that, but it was important to me to honor her love language. And so we recognize when we listen to the gospel, when we hear Jesus's words, when we read of his life with us, we see that he was embodying all of the different love languages. He was showing up in full humanity and reminding all of us all of the different ways to love one another. And so we want to look at these five languages and then figure out how could we implement them in our stewardship campaigns so that they show up for all of our people. So I think we sent an invite. I'm sure that we did because Davey's so on top of everything, inviting you to take the love languages quiz. And I'm hoping that everyone at this point knows their love language, but I do believe we're going to take just a couple of minutes to take that quiz if you would like to, and also to fill out just a pop-up poll helping us know which love languages are represented in our gathering today. So, Davy, what would you recommend?
So I have just popped the quiz, the link to the quiz into the chat. So if you follow that, it's a very quick quiz, should be able to finish it in about 5 minutes. When you finish, by the way, it's going to ask you to join their website and commit to life and all those kinds of, you don't need to do any of that unless you want to. That's on your time. But for today, when you finish, it'll give you your primary love language. And that's the information that we're going to put into the poll, which I'm opening right now. So as you finish your quiz, please fill out the poll that should be available on your screen and enter your love language into that. See some population already happening. So we'll give folks a few minutes to do that, and we'll be back with you in a mo. If you're just joining us, I saw a couple people just come into the room. Please take a look at the chat, and there's a little quiz in there to find out what your love language is. And then there's a poll that's live on the screen. If you take a minute or so to take that little quiz and then pop in your result, we'll carry on a conversation from there. Thank you. We're about halfway through. 13 of 26 of us have input their info.
Davy, why don't we go ahead and swap to the next slide as well that just lists the love languages so that if folks do not have the capacity or whatever, they could maybe just look at those and take a educated guess of which language may be theirs as they do the poll. Davy, we have one chat comment that the person's not seeing the poll.
All right, let me make sure it is in the chat. You might have had to have scrolled up a little bit, but now it's back in. Hope everyone can see that.
Well, the poll is what shows up on, it should be a pop-up on folks' screen, right?
Oh yeah, the poll should show up on your screen. It's showing up for some folks.
I wonder if somebody came on late, maybe it might not. It might have showed up before they got on,
Well, I wonder about that.
per chance.
I have no idea how that technology
How to
works.
get it back?
Well, I can't fill out the poll for whatever reason because probably because I created it. So you can add yourself in as you think about it or as you know yourself to be. We're getting close.
Oh, great. One of our participants said you can click on more and then polls if you're not seeing it as a pop-up. Thank you for teaching.
Thank
That's along the
you.
bottom
Thank you.
part of your screen. Thank you. You just taught us something, or taught me something at least.
Right. We all teach each other.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
That's-
We'll take another minute to do this. Thank you in the chat for everyone helping us with our technology.
Yes, we've got some love languages happening already, taking care of each
I
other.
see some acts of service. All right, anyone who hasn't filled out the poll, take a moment to do so, and we're gonna close it in a second here. And then proceed with our webinar. Knowing what your result is just helps give you a little insight into the next pieces of our webinar. Whenever you're ready, Amy, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So, Davy, do you want to publish the results of our poll? So we can see kind of where we stand. So, love languages, there are 5 of them. It looks like a third of us have quality time as our love language. We had no one who has gifts as a love language, which is fascinating. Acts of service was 26%, embodied presence or touch, 13%, and words of affirmation, 30%. So, really, that quality time, acts of service, and words of affirmation are right up there. So, thank you so much for your willingness to share that with all of us. Hopefully, you've learned something a bit new about yourself or just reaffirmed something you already know about yourself. What I want to point out in this is fascinatingly, none of us had gifts as our primary love language, and yet, often, as we are planning our stewardship campaigns, we try to think of what little gift do we want to give people for thanking them. And it's just an interesting way to notice where we're connecting or maybe disconnecting. So I'm going to briefly just explain what each of the love languages mean, and then I'm going to pass it on to Dina, who's going to talk about how this fits within the context of our churches. So acts of service, pretty much what it sounds like. It's when we either offer love or receive love in the support of one another. Maybe it's offering to clean the dishes, or somebody comes out and unexpectedly clears your sidewalk of snow. Those are acts of service, signs of showing care, affection, connection by doing something to support the other person. Physical presence or touch. Normally, this is called touch, and we recognize that in our churches that shows up differently than it does in our personal lives. And so we added physical presence as part of that. That's the gathering of people. It could also be things like someone who just really appreciates a hug or holding a hand or a pat on the shoulder. That sense of being connected physically and helps one feel supported and loved. Then quality time is focused attention on someone or something. I think we've all had the experience of having a conversation and being so grateful when somebody puts down their phone or mutes, the phone or the computer and really is fully attentive. And so quality time is an act of love and care. Words of affirmation, just all the good jobs, the thank yous, which we can never say enough. Specificity is always a beautiful thing for someone whose love language is words of affirmation, not just, thank you for showing up, but thank you for showing up. And I am so grateful that when you do, it's always with a big smile and such a warm presence. And then gifts, which are just small items, doesn't always have to be grand, but something that is offered that's a tangible thing, so that the person feels love or that we are offering love to them. So that's a really brief touch on each of those. And then I'm going to pass it to Dina to talk about in stewardship in our parishes.
Thank you, Amy. So what we're going to look at is how these different love languages are experienced in our liturgy, in our worship, as a way to get familiar with the concepts of the love languages. And then we'll see in that, I hope, how people are already stewarding their time and talent and treasure as we gather for worship. So acts of service, which I wrote it down, acts of service. Oh no, maybe I didn't write it down. How many of us like that? Is that 13%? Is that the embodied piece? I've got quality time 30%. Let me go back to the poll unless Amy
I
or
think it was 30%.
okay, 30%. I might have written it down wrong. So 30, there it is. Acts of service, 26%. So we're almost even between three of these with some embodied presence. Thank you for that. So the 26% of us get this acts of service piece where when we might do things in the congregation, we might show up and love our community by being on the stewardship team or making the stewardship announcements and taking that on. We might be behind the scenes on the altar guild. Perhaps we like to press the linens. We like to make sure everything's clean and ready to go and count out the communion wafers. I just got out of a service, or I left a little early. Our Absalom Jones service here at the cathedral in Baltimore is going on, and I was an usher for the first hour of that service, welcoming folks. And that is a lot of repeating certain things. It's a real active service, which stretched me because that's not my area. Walking a lot of people to where the bathrooms are so they know where the bathrooms are in an unfamiliar worship space, and answering questions. It's an act of service. The choir, the choir members in our congregations, many of them are at church at least twice a week for many hours, getting ready and singing, and that's a real act of service to share that gift and spend the time there. Of course, our faith formation teachers are also spending a lot of time serving one another and all of us in faith formation and preparation at home, which we don't always see. Of course, our lectors are preparing and serving us. And of course, our acolytes and crucifers who are coming early, getting vested, being ready to serve the congregation as it worships. So there are a lot of acts of service for those of us who speak that love language. There are many more, but these are a few
I
to get.
wonder if people want to name some of the other ones that aren't on
Please
them.
do. Please do either take yourself off mute or pop it into the chat if that's easier, depending on your situation. I'll make sure my chat box is open and ready. If this is your love language and you have an example of how you're speaking your love language in your community, please do go ahead and share that in the chat. Oh, yes, vergers and flower ministry, vergers especially, really keeping everyone organized, knowing how to manage things elegantly. The flower ministry, the Sunday morning coffee maker, right? The first person who shows up in your worship space, if you have an 8 o'clock, might get there before clergy, before any worshipers, just to turn that coffee pot on and get it heated up. That is a real act of service for our early bird.
And they might turn on the heat too in some of our congregations.
Yes.
That's an important ministry.
Very important this and sprinkle some ice melt if it's that kind of a Sunday morning where you live. So yes, the vestry members, that's active service, Sunday morning. Also coffee hour, the person who's perhaps cooking at home, baking at home, chopping at home, and bringing it together. Those are great examples. So we know that there are lots of opportunities in our congregations. If somebody's love language is acts of service, boy, have we got acts of service for you, right? And that might be good as you're seeking volunteers to find people that this is their love language and match them up with the way that they can volunteer best. Oh, the counters. I see tellers. I think that means like a bank teller, a counter. Although our theme for stewardship this year for TENS is tell out my soul. So perhaps we will all become tellers out of our souls. Tellers, counters, people who show up and serve by counting the money, taking it to the bank together, all of those good practices. Thank you, friends, for those good ideas. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide is the one that was called touch, and we renamed physical presence. And this is something I think worth really saying. While we changed it to physical presence, I want to say that, there's something really special about, as we all know from COVID, coming to church in person and to be in the physical presence of other people after we were really isolated by COVID and prevented from that. I think we understand more importantly than we did perhaps in 2019 how really life-giving physical presence is for some of us, that we need that time in the presence of other folks, good folks that share our values and want to sing and praise God together. There's even moments as a parish priest or as a canon now when I travel around that I see some of the most beautiful examples of really appropriate connection or appropriate intimacy when you are putting the wafer in somebody's hands and they are looking up with such a longing for that, or you're holding the chalice to their lips and they're putting their hand on the chalice and helping you. There are these moments of incredible physical presence, very appropriate moments where we know in really sacred and mystical ways that we are all one people. And so this is a really important love language. If this is not a person's love language and they're in charge of the liturgy, they might miss some of this, right? So let's just focus on where we get physical presence at worship. Of course, we have offering the priest, the priest. No, not offering the priest, offering the peace. That's better. Offering the peace, whether that's, the elbow thing or the peace or a wave or just saying the words. This is a really important way for people to connect. And this has been, I think we've noticed, a little hardship for some that want to hug or really be more physically present with those who are uncomfortable now because of some physical health issues or anxiety around that. In one congregation where I served recently for many years, we started to sing a song out of music that makes community, peace, salam, shalom, so that we could all just have sort of a standard way to sing that song and greet one another and share it, since there was some awkwardness in the physical presence. Standing, sitting, and kneeling, those embodied movements in our liturgy, while our body permits us to do those things, can really draw us into the presence of God and to be together. When you're on a pew and everyone's kneeling or you're kneeling for communion together, there is a solidarity in that experience that is very physical. Singing, I mean, that gets deep into us and pulls out the breath and gets us breathing even in time together. Physical presence of singing is just one of my favorite pieces of worship, to hear the people next to us, to be that close. The Book of Common Prayer and the hymnal, whether you've got a fully printed bulletin in your hand, some people really like the physicality of pulling out the books and knowing how to flip through them. There's something familiar about the books themselves in a physical way. Consuming the bread and the wine is a physical act. Again, something we really noticed during COVID and our exile into that time. The touch, the connection, the ways that we do that. Receiving a blessing. If you place your arms across a chest and somebody places their hands on your forehead, or if you go to a healing station, or even in a place where somebody says a blessing and you cross yourself, there are these studies that show how much we can reduce anxiety by touch. And even touching our own hand softly, kind of doing this motion. So these motions really do something for us and help us to feel loved. Vestments, linens, that, oh my gosh, when you are vesting, you know that you are shifting physically into a different physical presence and worship space. Also, when you put on certain chasubles, when you are at the altar, you feel the weight, especially, I will say, for those of you that have not put on a chasuble, if it is raw silk, it's a very heavy. If you've got raw silk, you feel the weight, and there's a physical presence to that as well. All the items that we look out and see have a real impact and help us to feel loved if physical presence or touch is our love language. What other ways might you put into the chat and share with us that you experience physical presence as a love language we speak to one another in worship? Any other ideas about that? Unction and anointing? Absolutely. Boy, there's nothing like sitting next to somebody's bed in the midst of either crisis or challenge or at the end of life. That physical presence, and with families, to get families to reach out and touch their beloved at that time and say prayers and lay hands. Very, very important physical presence moments. We have folks who rock baby strollers for moms who are busy with another child. You need to publish that in your marketing, because when my kids were young, I would have gone just for that service. In fact, many of us know the gift of being in a community that will take one of our children when we've just had it, and play with them and show them storybooks in church while we can just catch our breath and maybe hear some adult conversation. What a gift. And children don't understand that not everybody is physically available to them. So it's really wonderful to have children in a congregation that will run over and maybe hug somebody's leg or hand things to people. They really understand perhaps how important physical presence is. Oh, attending a confirmation or a reception. Yes, whether it's the holding of the hand during reception or the laying on of hands during confirmation or touching on the shoulder. And we're doing these things in different dioceses a little bit differently now, I think, than certainly 50 years ago. You might, in your congregation, hear the bishop say, "May I place my hand on your forehead," or "May I bless you," because not everyone understands these same physical motions that we do in the church. So we're having to translate that for folks as they come up to be
Yeah,
confirmed.
I was just going to say that, Dina, that one of the things I have learned about encountering more neurodiverse members and
Yes.
more people aware of boundaries and is that we're now having open conversation about what embodied presence and touch is. May I hug you? May I touch you? Do you want an
Yes.
elbow, a high five, a side hug?
Yes.
And we have options so that it's not just one way and people feel that they can engage on their terms, and that's so important, or not engage at all, which is also a way of having embodied presence.
Yes.
And I wanted to make note just of two quick things. You may be aware as we're going through these lists, there is a lot of overlap. So for example, that rocking the stroller, that is a physical presence act. It's also an act of service. So these are not hard and fast categories. There's a lot of flow between them, and that can be really helpful as we're designing ways of speaking love to our folks, to recognize that one act could be received in several different languages of love. The other thing that I wanted to mention when we talked about children, especially children in worship or in our gathering spaces, one of the gifts of their physical presence is they do not have sort of the do's and don'ts, shoulds and should nots in their embodiment that we adults have. And so they show up in a way that is fully physically present, that we often, as polite grown-ups, don't do. But there's some real beauty in that as the body of Christ, of recognizing that there is love embodied in all of it, even in the squawking baby or the, uh, squiggly toddler or any of that, and what a gift of physical presence that is, of showing up exactly who we are and how we feel.
Thanks, Davy. Thanks, Amy. So our next slide, and thank you for your sharing on the chat, friends. Our next slide is my favorite because it's my love language. So and I'm an extrovert, if you don't know me or couldn't guess. I love spending time with people. I love when they turn off their phones, because I have a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old. When my young people in my life will turn off their phones, or just the phones are not out in front, and we can really look at each other and be together at the dinner table where phones are not allowed. Dinner table conversation is my all-time favorite, which is not unlike being at the table for Eucharist and gathering together and being fully present to one another in that place. I also really, as I said before, ushering is an act of service. And as Amy's pointed out, there's a lot of overlap. Ushers and greeters help us to really craft and create, and Altar Guild helped us create space for quality time. So there is a lot of overlap there. Gathering to worship, being there for one another, people that come early to make sure others feel welcomed, and really focus on us having time for worship and for coffee. Those are important ways to make quality time available. Settling our minds and hearts for those of us with kind of monkey brain going on all the time. That opening piece of music, whether it's a prelude, or even if you get there so early that you can hear the organist practicing or the pianist practicing, that might be a way to enter into deeper quality time with God and with God's people, and allow ourselves to really settle and focus, right? To listen to the readings carefully. Um, for me, what I really love about worship is when we show up at worship, it is like the dinner table. It's like when somebody says to you, I'm all yours, what do you need? That's what we do for one another at worship. I'm all yours, God. I'm all yours, God's people. What do we need together? And for somebody like me, that's going to be pretty beautiful. Altar Guild is also what I hear about from folks that serve on the Altar Guild. It seems like an act of service. It is also about quality time. There were several folks on the Altar Guild throughout the years that have said how beautiful it is on a Saturday afternoon to be all alone in the church and to just have one light on, setting the altar, putting the linens out, and to have that time with God and to be able to look at the stained glass windows and really center themselves, that is a quality time of prayer for them that is really important. Oh, women's retreat. That's from Mary. Thank you. Other examples for you of what counts as quality time? 30% of us are speaking a love language of quality time. That's what we seek, so that we know that we are loved. Being together on retreat is one of those ways. Showing up for someone else, perhaps when they're waiting for a diagnosis or after surgery, could also be quality time. Those things happen outside of the liturgy. When we also lift up the names of our members and take time in the liturgy to pray for God's people that have said, please pray for me, we are sharing our quality time through prayer with one another and with them. Praying Compline, absolutely. Ooh, finance committee meeting. That is quality. I love a good finance committee meeting. And I'm spending time with two of those on Tuesday night this week, back to back. And that is a real gift, to give that quality time to the parish. Gathering at each other's homes. There's something that happens when we're having quality time in one another's homes. It's really different from at church. And in stewardship, we sometimes call that cottage meetings or small groups, where we might talk about stewardship topics together and have hospitality be at the heart of those meetings in our homes. Listening groups. One-on-one listening for community organizing is another way to spend quality time with people and really listen deeply. These are great examples. Davy, Amy, anything to add?
I love what Kurt said in the chat about two very different ways of experiencing quality time for those early arrivers in church. You know, some people like to be contemplative and maybe kneel in prayer and be quiet. And then there are those who are like, can't wait to see their friends and share all the great news. And there's that something in the middle of that with of beauty. People can find moments of quiet and quality while people around them are buzzing and catching
Yeah.
up on a week of news.
Yes.
I love that.
Oh, that is hard, isn't it? I mean, it's wonderful and beautiful. And then, when you hear it kind of as an extrovert, I actually really like to be quiet before worship. And so it's hard to get that quiet for me unless I'm in church. I need that space. And I understand how excited people are to see each other. Separate chapel to pray is a way to make space for that quality time in prayer. Thank you for that, Lorraine. These are great examples. All right, let's go to the next one. This one is words of affirmation. And so I just want to point out, so how you want to communicate your love might be different than how your loved one understands. There's a lot of variety, right? So I'm going to give you an example. My mother, who lives in an apartment in our basement, she calls it the lower level. So my mother loves to give love as acts of service, but it's not how she receives love. She would prefer to receive love in words of affirmation. So she wants to cook you a meal or bake you a cake, and then what she needs to know you love her is that it was delicious, right? She needs her act of service affirmed by your words. She will retain every word you said about the food, and then she can tell other people how much you liked it, and she'll reaffirm herself that way. So, how we want to give love versus how we receive love are often different things. So, words of affirmation, we do that at worship by praising God together in the hymns, all those beautiful words that creative folks have written down for us to put into the language we have, what we are feeling and thinking and wanting to say together to God, affirming God's goodness and power. The Great Thanksgiving is an affirmation that God is doing good things for us all the time, and we are always in a position of giving God thanks. And thanking is an affirmation. Sharing the peace. Have you ever gone to church when you've been grumpy with somebody at your church or in your family, and you do the confession and you hear the absolution, and then you turn to that person you've been grumpy with, and the peace of the Lord be always with you? Changes you and makes you less grumpy at that person, because those words affirm that God is making the peace between us more and more real all the time. And so we can drop things and be at peace with one another, forgive ourselves, forgive others. So sharing the peace is a word of affirmation that actually does a thing in our lives when we're open to it. Very important. I'm also thinking about announcements in the liturgy. We didn't put this on here, but during the announcements, now I go from congregation to congregation every week, and I hear a lot of folks really using that time to thank one group or one person that really got something off and running in the congregation. Either thanking the choir because they offered a wonderful concert on the weekend, or thanking somebody for stepping up and doing something like heading up the casserole brigade. Those words of affirmation to the public, even if you're not thanking me, I hear you affirming somebody. And I register that as feeling loved because you are thanking people who step up and you're affirming their good gifts. Davy Gerhard has this gift. If you get emails from Davy or you talk with Davy, he has a real gift for affirming the people around him in a way that is genuine and helps you to understand that he valued what you did together, which, Davy, you're very good at words of affirmation. So I threw that in. You didn't know I was going to say
I
that.
didn't know that.
I'm trying to affirm you back
I
with words.
feel it. I feel the
Thank
love.
you. Good, good, good. What else, friends? What else do we do in our congregations, in our worship setting, to affirm?
I love that you brought up the announcement time, Dina, because, in so many pieces of our liturgy, we're like trying to shorten that. Those announcements, they go on forever. But you know what? They're really important because, as you say, they're these great connecting pieces. Thank you. And also, here are opportunities for acts of service. Here are, it's like a lot happens in the announcements that are about love and our community. And maybe we shouldn't be so quick to try and shorten them and tighten them. Read the bulletin,
For
which we
sure.
also
Read
say,
the details in the bulletin and thank the people in front of the people, right?
right, love it.
Yeah, it's Oh, ministry reports at annual or all parish meetings, giving Episcopal pins to thank others for their service. So that kind of ties into a gift as well. And it's an outward affirmation as you're speaking and you give them an item. It's really both of those together. That's a good example. Oh, I'm thinking about my Sunday school pin as a child. Every year that I had perfect attendance, I got another little hanging piece to just kind of hang down my lapel. I didn't have a lapel then. So yeah, those sorts of ways to affirm that people have shown up and have done things. Also in our e-newsletters, we could use that in the same ways the announcements to really highlight and thank some of the extraordinary, maybe the daily effort, the ordinary effort of folks that deserve some affirmation. All right. Let's move. Oh, personal thank you notes. Okay. So here's one. We all feel differently about some of these things. Sending thank you cards either from a stewardship chair, a treasurer, a rector for pledges that are turned in for pledge cards. I know a congregation in Baltimore that has a well-established tradition of affirming everybody at a special dinner in Advent that got their pledge card in at a certain date. And so that really affirms that people are on board and committed. Sending thank you cards to different groups of servers each month this year. That's a lovely stewardship practice.
That's really a beautiful one. And
Yeah.
you can rotate through all of your different ministries.
Yep.
A lot of congregations also have a birthday card ministry, where some of these same people who love writing note cards will write out birthday cards. It's
Yes.
just more chances to show love.
Absolutely. Oh, so here's another example along those lines. There was somebody in my last parish, Diane, and she loved to write note cards. And we were all on a work experience ministry project in Appalachia. And when one of the young people on that trip, who was about 16 years old, figured out that it's Diane that sends her birthday cards and get well cards when she was sick, when she met Diane and figured that all out, she said to Diane, "Oh, you're the card ninja." So I just love that phrase, that card ninja that can really affirm how important each member is. So we've got lots of ninjas in the parish. All right, let's look at the next slide. All right, gifts. So, as Amy said, if you're not somebody, the older I get, the less I want gifts or just random gifts, to be honest. I'm trying to clean out the house. And when you're in that mindset, you're like, no gifts, please, no gifts. Or you might have people in your life that say, please don't buy me anything. I just want experiences. Or I say, I want experiences with you because I love quality time. So gifts is something for those of us that, and since none of us put gifts as our love language, we'll spend a little time thinking about that. In your congregation around stewardship, you might think of giving something to people that are participating or as an invitation to participate. So that's what a lot of these not-for-profits have figured out when they send you mailing addresses in the mail and then ask you for a gift, is if they give you something, that obligation is going to kick in and you're going to write, I don't know, $5, $10, $30, $3,000, I don't know, check for those mailing address labels. So in parish ministry, some of the things that I've seen really work well is to get custom grocery bags, nice reusable grocery bags made, and put the pledge packets in that reusable grocery bag and give that gift to everybody at the start of pledging season so that it's about the environment and sustainability. It's also evangelism because when you're at the grocery store, you've got the name of your church on a bag. And ideally, they're useful for many, many years. And then folks have that really wonderful item, appreciate it, and pay more attention to what's inside. I didn't think of that. Probably somebody with a gift love language thought of that, and it worked really well. In worship, a lot of our service has to do with gifts, physical gifts. We bring up the gifts. That's our language. We offer the gifts of bread and wine. We bring up the gifts that come from our life and our labor in the offering plate. We offer our gifts. We sing praise songs as we offer our gifts and dedicate them to God. We've got the gift of volunteering. Oh, the volunteers, let me see. Plate and pledge, those are gifts. The volunteer time is a gift. The bread and the wine, artwork. If we look around our congregations, many of us have worship spaces where generations past have given gifts in order to create a beautiful atmosphere for worship. Some of us are still creating that space in our worship area or trying to maintain it really well. And some of us also come off hours to make sure that that all that space is ready. We give our time in acts of service to clean, polish, repair, and to give our gifts that way. Think about physical gift giving. We talked about the pins that you might give to volunteers. Oh, the gifts of Bibles and books of common prayer after confirmation or baptism. The candle that is lit from the Paschal candle at a baptism. I hadn't thought about that. So that we are reminded to carry the light of Christ into the world. Welcome bags for visitors. Yes. I'm also thinking of a year that we had a ceramic artist in the congregation use cookie cutters to make hearts out of ceramic and make ornaments to give at Christmas to all newcomers at Christmas. And people did raise their hands so they could get an ornament and we could welcome the newcomers with a gift. There's lots of worries about having enough, but we always had plenty of those ornaments. So that can be a nice way for people to receive a gift as a newcomer. And sometimes we have gift, like little bags for children to use during worship, which whether or not they take those bags home, feels like you're handing someone a gift as they walk in the door. You're handing the parents a gift when they can open that up and there's coloring books and crayons and perhaps little puzzles or soft toys. That can be a real gift. Any other ideas about physical gifts? Altar flowers. Yes, when we take them off the altar after the service and carry them. I'm also thinking, Amy, that's a good one. I'm thinking about, I know folks that go and cut flowers in their gardens and bring in flowers from their yard or their garden and to give that gift and see something from their yard at worship. That must be a really beautiful feeling. And then to know they go on to gladden the hearts of others that are homebound. Eucharistic visits, yes, bringing the gifts out. And, we have prayers that say that we're taking these gifts that have been consecrated here and taking this out now to extend our presence, right? Our physical presence. Any other gifts you can think of? All right. All right. So let's see, all right. We're going to look now at scripture. So we looked at liturgy, and we're going to do this pretty quickly. I've got to look at the time. What I want to share about this is throughout the scriptures, we can see that Jesus speaks all the love languages. So whatever your love language is, you can find some example of Jesus speaking the the love to you in a way that you can receive when we look at these scripture texts. These are pretty well-known stories here. Our first one from Matthew 9 is the woman who reaches out to touch the fringe of Jesus's cloak. So she's got that physical presence piece, the touch of his cloak, and she is wanting some quality, or maybe she doesn't want quality time with Jesus. Maybe she's avoiding it and just wants to touch his cloak, not bother the master, the rabbi. And he does want quality time with her. He stops everything and says, is this you? Take heart. Your faith has made you well. So that's words of affirmation. Your faith, look at your amazing faith. And then she's made well, which is an act of service. It is a gift to her. So we've got a lot of love language being spoken by Jesus in this text. Does anyone notice anything else they want to lift into our chat box? If anything comes up, I'll try to catch it. All right, let's look at another story. We've got 3 of these, I believe. So the next one is also well known. It's one of my favorites, the alabaster jar. That's a gift. That's a physical object of great worth. It's very expensive, the object, and what's in it is even more expensive, the nard, very costly. So we've got this very high status gift being presented. We've got the act of service with that ointment. We've got the physical touch, like an anointing still is today. We've got quality time where people are talking to one another and being in the presence of friends together with one another. So we have this really, and I think here we also have a misunderstanding about love languages. We've got those who say, the money, the acts of service, that money could have been an act of service to the poor. That's just a very different way to use our resources. I want to use our resources to love in this way. She wants to use the resources to love in this way. We all speak such different love languages. So perhaps that's a little sermon fodder for a future sermon, all the different ways we understand our love playing out. And then the last line here, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. Isn't that an affirmation of what she has done? How she has served and really given, offered gifts. Really beautiful. It's a good way to thank her.
She's also doing something extraordinarily countercultural. She's a woman giving a gift to a man. She's breaking all kinds of boundaries, not just breaking a jar of costly ointment, but really
Yes.
breaking boundaries. And that's also when we offer ourselves to the world in service, taking risks even. Those are also love languages, deep ones.
Right. That's part of the sacrifice of loving, isn't it? That putting ourselves out there could be a cost to it. We could be scolded like she was, right? And I think scolded is kind of the opposite of words of affirmation. Um, Hopefully, we're not scolding one another. That's not helpful, right? Thank you, Davy. Amy, anything to add?
Well, I was going to propose, I'm not sure that we have the time, but I was going to propose that we take one of these and have people do a quick glance at the story to refresh themselves, and then just maybe popcorn style in the chat
Nice.
box or aloud say what love languages you're recognizing and, how or where.
Yep,
Let's do that for the next one, Davy.
sounds good.
All right, so let's take a moment to spend some quality time with this text. And after I've given myself time to read it again, I'll start inviting your responses. But please hold off on those until I ask for them so that people aren't distracted and can really focus. When you're ready, go ahead and pop what you notice as a love language in the Mark II story. Pop it into our chat. Thank you, Della. We see those words of affirmation. Your sins are forgiven. We still hear those words today affirming us in the liturgy. That's another affirmation in the liturgy is absolution and forgiveness. We see some physical presence. Absolutely. It's a pretty physical action. The carrying, the lowering, all of that, the healing, the getting up, physical presence, acts of service. Those folks that are carrying, that's an act of service. All the work that they did is an act of service. Words of affirmation, yes, affirmation. Gift of healing, that is a gift. Physical presence. At the end, too, we've never seen anything like this. Wow. Those are affirming words about the miracle and the healing. What else do we notice?
And if it's easier to speak up, feel free to unmute and say something too. We would love to hear from everyone who feels so moved.
Davey, thanks for adding Jesus spends quality time in the middle of a crowd. Isn't that the hardest when everybody's pulling at you and you're in the middle of something and then, well, I guess something did drop down right in front of him. It was hard to not focus on it. And really, they were so crowded. And for Jesus to turn his full attention on the paralytic who so many would walk by. The friends gave quality time to their paralyzed friend. All right. Thank you for those comments that you see in Mark 2, 1 through 12. Lots of different love languages here. Thank you, Davy.
Thank you, Dina. And thank you all for participating in that. So we've looked a little bit at our liturgy and our scripture, so some of our traditions and our scripture. Let's talk a little bit about now as we move into how we share our time, talent, and treasure, and how we ask other people to share their time, talent, and treasure. So our stewardship campaigns. What does the love language and stewardship look like? As Dina mentioned at the beginning, part of it is understanding our own love language, and the other is understanding other people's love language. So as we think about running campaigns, we want to make sure that we are including all the ways that people receive our messages so that they can respond in their unique way. So if we're missing any one of those love languages from our stewardship campaigns, we're missing out on an opportunity to reach a particular person who has a particular way of receiving information. This is just more for us to think about. So why are people motivated to share? Well, recognition, those words of affirmation, perhaps it's those little gifts that they get, a Starbucks card for being on the stewardship committee. People are motivated by that kind of recognition. People are motivated by it feels good to give, right? It's another one of the ways that so maybe that's our quality time or that act of service. We want to be recognized. It feels good when we do something. We want to see our gifts at work in the world. That's another motivation for why people make their gifts of time, talent, and treasure to church. We were asked. So what's more affirming than being asked directly to participate, being invited into something? This is one of the most beautiful things we can do in community. People are motivated by sense of duty and to be active changing the world. So let's take a little look at each of these. So as Charles, who is mentor to many of us in stewardship, Charles Clowen will say that the important words are thank you, thank you, thank you. Sorry, Charles, I took your line from you. Thank you, thank you, thank you is what we need to be saying to our members, to those who give us gifts, who participate in the campaign. And we need to remember as stewardship leaders, as church leaders, that people deserve real recognition for that. And we often think that we want to thank them 7 times for a gift. Handwritten notes that we've talked about, an announcement. We've raised this much money, we have this many volunteers for next year, we have all of our ministry areas covered. That sort of recognition that you do at the annual meeting or at your stewardship wrap up. Maybe you throw a big party, either at the kickoff or the ending or at your annual meeting, maybe at all of those. Those are opportunities for great, if you can have a cake and a potluck, you can have a party in the Episcopal Church. It's great. So how do we thank people? Make sure that we're doing that, because that is one of the ways that people are motivated to then give again and bringing others into the family of giving. Giving feels good because it gives you that reaffirmation right as you're doing it. I've made this gift. I know it is meaningful. People recognize it and appreciate it. So if you're a person who's motivated by feeling good in the gift, you want to receive messages from your church about how that gift is received, how it's spent out in the world, how that gift that you've made is transformed by the action of love into ministry in the church and into your community. So make sure that as you are receiving gifts, that you're able to communicate back out. This is what we're doing with your gift. It's another great thing about an annual meeting is that you can talk about how the money comes in and how we transform it through ministry to move out into the world. That's that connection with our budgets in church. They're not just documents of how we spend and save money. They're documents of transformation from money to meaning. And that's a huge gift that we offer. So, and give people the language of being co-creators. Let them know that they are partners in your ministry by the sharing of their gifts. It's so important that we see the impact of our gifts. I often say that, it's great if you have a food program, continue doing that work. It's even better when you can say, this is how many people we feed every week, and this is where the food comes from, and this is how many volunteers are included. Tell the story about the impact and bring those stories back into your community so that people can hear those words of affirmation, so they can feel the love that's being generated through story. So if it's appropriate to ask people who benefit from some of your external outward facing ministries to share the story of how how your gifts impact them, tell those stories, video or written, put them in your newsletter, put them on your social media, say them at the announcement. Stories of impact are so important in how we remind people that their gift, when it goes into the plate, or when it's received by the church, is again transformed into ministry. It doesn't just sit in a vault, in a treasury somewhere. It gets spent out in the world where we change the world. Invitation is, I think, one of the most beautiful gifts that we have in church, and we don't always know how to use it. We talked about this recently at the TENS board about, a lot of our churches describe themselves as being welcoming, but are they invitational? Do we know how to actually move beyond being ready to accept people and going out and finding them and inviting them to participate through acts of service, inviting them to participate? We often have great ministry opportunities in the community. We run food banks, we do tutoring, we do backpack, we do park cleanups, all these things that benefit our communities, and we only advertise those volunteer opportunities in our church bulletin, only getting the members. Well, what if we advertise that in the community? What if we open that up to our neighbors and said, come join us on Saturday to clean up the riverbank or to distribute bags of socks and blankets and warm clothes to people who are living on the street, and brought them along with us. Now they get a little glimpse into our community, how we have acts of service, and they might learn that we're Christians by our love and want to come see what we do on Sundays. Often people will explore church on Saturday before they explore church on Sunday. So give them the opportunity to explore how their acts of service can be used in your community. We don't just isolate and have opportunities for our members only. We bring the community along with us. Invite people to help solve the complex problems of church through the wisdom they've gained at their business boardroom or in their education or in their experience and wisdom. We have complex things to solve in our congregations about real estate and use of property and HR issues. Dwell and learn from the experts in your congregation on how you can do that. The vestry can't solve every problem, so invite other people into sharing those gifts, how they might help you. It doesn't often feel thankful to invite someone to serve on a task force or a committee, but populating those committees is really important work. Um, it's the important work of community building. It's the thousands of committees that we need to serve on in order to affect social change or to affect good administration in our congregations. So it's an invitation to act and to serve when we invite people to serve on a committee or a task force or a subcommittee or any of the other names that we have for things that people can do with their Tuesday evenings. So make certain that we are offering and inviting people to share their gifts, not just their checks and their pledges, but the skills they've learned and the resources they have, the relationships that they've built out in the community. All of those can be transformed in church. People are motivated by a sense of duty. And this is true of every generation, but more in our older generations than our younger ones. The church needs your gift. It's been here for you. Make sure that you make it there for other people. If that is a core group in your congregation and that love language is present, make certain that people know that that is a part of their responsibility. The word for stewardship that we're using in Spanish when we translate our documents is co-responsibility, corresponsabilidad. And it's this idea that we are jointly responsible for our church. This isn't just something that the church handles or something that's completely on the shoulders of our members. Together we work on this. It's a cooperative situation. It's a beautiful way to think about how we have a responsibility and a job to do to make certain that our churches are sustainable and accountable and doing the work in the community that they're doing. Finally, hopefully we got into church. We signed on to that baptismal covenant because we wanted to see change in ourselves and change in the world around us. And by being a part of something that is an agent for change, and by following a prophet who preached change and transition and that it's okay to change and challenge, we can get out there and do this work and stand behind millennia of prophets and people who have done this work, and our churches will support us in doing this work as well. So when you have a great ministry idea, something that is burning in your heart that needs to be solved in the community, bring it to your church and bring people along with you. I love those invitations that people stand up and say, I'm doing a walk for muscular dystrophy next week, and I need 7 people to sign up and walk with me. I'm doing a grocery run for some shut-ins. Will someone else join me in this work? Invitation to do these things, to be a part of the change in the world, is how we develop that particular love language and a desire to see change. When you're designing your campaign, again, make certain, please, that you are speaking all the love languages and hearing all the love languages. That means that we have embodied physical acts of service tied to your campaign. So that might be the things that we collect and bring up to the altar along with our pledges. It might be ways that we engage our community. Create connection opportunities through volunteerism, through service opportunities, through one-on-one meetings in your houses. The congregation that just hosted TENS for its annual retreat is doing a series of house churches through Lent, where they're just bringing people together. They've got some tabletop questions to ask. It's a potluck. What a great way to have community. There's no agenda other than getting together and talking. It's a beautiful way to have and create that love language. When you're rolling out your campaign, think about doing that in a stewardship campaign. What would it be like if we hosted dinners or had fellowship outside of church? Make certain that your sermons are about affirmation, about our generosity, our abundance, not just in the stewardship campaign, but all year long. Remind people that our response to God's generosity is through that abundant response of giving and wanting to share. So that's how we are agents of that transformation within ourselves. We take what God gives us, we transform it, and we move it back out into the world. So make certain that you're speaking all the languages of love in your campaign so that people can hear it in the way that they need to. At the same time, make certain that we are hearing what people are saying to us about how they want to be communicated with, that they have a variety of expressions. So filling out a physical card, volunteering their time and service, telling their story in a testimonial, and maybe, making gifts available through potlucks or other things that we do at stewardship time to let people know that we're doing something different. So speaking and hearing all the love languages should be a part of your campaign. And I hope that through the training and conversations we've had today, we've given you some nuggets that you can bring into your next pledge campaign as you think about how to tailor those messages and share the good news with folks. I'm going to turn this back over to my colleague Amy to talk about anything that's left over and how we might use this information.
Okay, thank you, Davy, and thank you, Dina. It's just always delightful to um, lead things with you. And thank you to everyone who's offered their ideas and thoughts so far. I'd like to hear a bit more from the wisdom of this gathering. So, one of the best things that we know is that we have a lot to teach one another. And I would like to hear from folks, should you be willing to share, either by unmuting or in the chat, as you've heard this idea of approaching your stewardship campaign, your pledging, your giving in a new way. I'm wondering what has struck you, what you might be feeling some energy to try, or where you're feeling that you would like to hear some words of affirmation of things that you recognize you're already doing really well that other folks may want to know about so that we can help share the good news. So, does anyone have some thoughts they would like to share with us, practices, ideas?
I'm going to stop sharing the screen and pull us back into our room so we can all see each other's faces as we have this conversation. Look at that. Charles, you've got your hand up.
My whole ministry, I've been involved in stewardship. And I find that thanking people Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, the altar guild, the choir, the church school teachers, make an incredible impact and then thank people for their generosity to make this happen. So all year, people hear kind of effective ministry their money is making possible. I think that's really key. And so when you begin your stewardship campaign in the fall, they've been listening to all the great things the church has done during the year. And that includes, of course, all the outreach projects as well. Secondly, I always feel that we have to bring new people into the life of the church. One thing I found very effective, which costs no money, was at 7:30 in the morning, I'd be out on the front porch of our church welcoming people. And so was my staff. My associates were there. Usher was there to welcome people with a little prayer list in my hand. So if they told me their mother was sick, we could remember in the prayers that day. I did the same thing at 9:30 in the morning. And the good news is the bishop came and I told him he needed to be out there 7:30 vested. So to begin the service at 8, and he did. Once the bishops did it, everybody else did it too in staff and staff. But it was a great way of welcoming people, didn't cost any money, and a new person had a chance to meet, chat with them. And then the last thing we did is on the Sunday bulletin, the back page was a welcoming form. No little thing in the, in the pew, back page of the bulletin as a welcoming form, which could be given to me or the ushers to welcome people. So that was important to me. And then calling them the next day. Usually got answering machines back then. Today you get the same thing, but welcoming them to coming to church and inviting myself to go visit them or having them visit us. The last thing I did is there are many preachers that are better pastors than me and administrators than me, but I'm a great luncher. And when I wanted if I wanted somebody in the stewardship committee, I took them out for lunch. I didn't grab them at hospitality hour. I took them out for lunch. And the only negative was at the end of my ministry, people were afraid to have lunch with me. Because I would talk to them one-on-one, men and women, saying how important it is this stewardship committee is. Well, we need you for the help. So I literally prayed about these people. And I want to pick a cross-section of people that are very effective. So I took them out for lunch and asked them. And very few people said no.
Thank you, Charles. That's so helpful to hear. I had a really wonderful conversation this week with Bishop Dan Edwards, former Bishop of Nevada. He's been a very good friend to TENS. And he reminded me in our conversation that our faith is not fundraising, our faith is generosity. And so we need to remember as we're moving through everything that we're being generous, we're being grateful, as Charles was reminding us, and that we are showing up in love in ways that are countercultural. And yet that's the good news, right, folks? That all the things we see on the outside that seem to be success are not really what success is. We know that success is about the welcome, the inclusion, the love, the generosity that we have to offer. So thank you. Does anybody else have practices or thoughts that they're inspired to share? Yes, Dina.
I'm hoping folks will share what gift items, types of things they have found successful, since that's not all of our love language. It would be really helpful to know what has worked in different congregations. And I reached for this button about supporting a capital campaign. And then I found a little pin that Charles gave me from the Legacy Society for the diocese. And then I found another pin that a colleague, Jason Poling, has given me for the Carl Wright Legacy, Bishop Carl Wright Legacy Society. So what kinds of things, these are the three I have in my hands. Would you share those in the chat so that I could get good ideas from everyone? I would love that.
A great idea, Dina. I'm sure we all have had things that were more successful than others. And I want to point out that if you are using TENS as your theme, and we have a shop where you can buy pre-researched all the things, TENS swag for each year's campaign. And so I can tell you one of the things I did as we're getting ready for our annual meeting tomorrow is I got last year's Walk in Love TENS water bottles to give to all of our outgoing vestry and ministry leaders. I think we all have ideas. I love these things that I'm seeing. A small plant or a loaf of bread. I know sometimes people will do a bulb that you can force so that you have this joy of watching the plant grow. Getting Episcopal calendars is a nice gift. Things that are useful, I think we're often all looking for. Is so true. We did a gift one year of coffee mugs, and then we also encourage folks, if you don't need the mug, leave it in the kitchen, and then they become our creation care coffee hour mugs instead of throwing things away. Charles, I saw your hand.
Well, this is very effective. We honored Mothering Sunday, which is done in England, and all the women in the church received a carnation.
Nice.
The men cooked wonderful food or brought wonderful food for all the women of the church. And that was just mothers. It was any girl over 16. It was part of the mothering, taking care of our children, taking care of each other. And no women ever complained about getting the flower and getting a really nice hospitality hour.
Yeah, I bet. I see in here that another parish does golf balls on Father's Day, and I I love the idea of the Polly Murray quarter to all members as a gift. Providing newcomers a gift bag publicly during announcements after the service. Everybody's got wonderful ideas. Thank you. So also, I'm just wondering, is there anything that really aligns with your own personal love language that you're finding it really easy to offer to your congregations? Um, we're talking about a bit about where maybe we don't all align with the gifts, but maybe something that hasn't been mentioned that aligns with a specific love language that you would like to share with us aloud or in the chat. I love the idea someone said earlier, we've talked a couple times about the personal notes. I think that hits so many love languages, the quality time. Nowadays, especially if I get a handwritten card, I am so honored that the person took the time to write that card to me. It just is something extra. It's just a precious little keepsake. The words of affirmation that come with that. A simple thing that used to be so common now has become just this precious act of love. Lorraine shared that they do blessing bags for the homeless and carry them in their cars for distribution on the spot. So many folks do that. I love that. Um, I know that our outreach committee gave all of the children and their families $5 gift cards to a local grocery store and encouraged the families together to hand those out. Can really make a difference for someone who's struggling with food security or housing security, to have that moment of connection and then the gift of some money.
A few years ago, my congregation had the folks from Episcopal Community Services, which is the homeless services provider here in San Francisco, come out to our congregation, and we did a whole gift bag, and put them in your car and take them around as you see people. But the second piece of instruction that ended up being both the most difficult to implement and the most meaningful was, you must look them in the eye and have a meaningful conversation with them as you give them the bag. And that whole moment of having those words, that physical moment of not being embarrassed or not being uncomfortable, was transformative for many of our members. And they reported just unlocking these great conversations. It's seeing that person with dignity and not just providing them something that they need, but also the other things they need. Recognition, I see you. It was a beautiful act of service.
That is really gorgeous, really honoring the other person's humanity. And that's beautiful. I also want to make note, I know we're just about ready to wrap up, but I really liked Mary's comment about that they've been making phone calls to folks who've been missing from church for a bit of time. I really think it's important that we remember that we're all about relationship, right? We understand that we know God in most ways because of our relationships with one another and with others in the world, in our embodied sense of all of that, and in our understanding that we are the body of Christ right now. And so we need to take care that we are not only reaching out to our folks when we're asking them for something, to give us money, to volunteer on this ministry, to serve on this committee, that we are in relationship 24/7, 365, and that we are honoring that. I love this with phone calls, with cards, with connections at coffee hour, and really being curious about, in your own context, how is your community making sure that people know they are valued, not just because what they are offering or have to offer, but because of just who they are and their presence. And that is one of the most loving gifts we can give. So, Davey, I'm going to pop it back to you as we round out.
Great. Well, thank you, friends, for joining us. And special thanks to my wonderful colleagues, Amy and Dina, for joining on this webinar. Thanks to all you for spending some of your Saturday with us. I hope this was meaningful as you go through and prepare for your campaigns. If you use these love languages and you design campaigns that reach out to folks in a multitude of ways, let us know how that worked, what you did that was different, so that we can put it into next year's training and next year's product. We're always evolving, always learning, always adapting. And we love to share that, what you do, with everyone else in the Episcopal Church. So help us do that. Your gifts are really important to the church, and I'm talking about your time. Stewardship is not always everybody's favorite ministry. It's not often thanked in our congregations as much as it should be, and I want you to know that you are deeply loved and appreciated by your community, by us. You have a network of support here for you, and we are that crew that can ride with you and help you as you develop your resources. Let us know how we can be a part of your campaign. We'll send you an email later this weekend with the information, the videos, the slides, and any links that we talked about, and we'll give you ways to stay in touch. Thank you, friends. I release you to your Saturdays. Have a beautiful day.
Thanks, Davy. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Davy.
friends.
Bye.
Bye.